Welcome to this, the second in a series of effective boardmanship workshops. Tonight's topic is timely and appropriate for the important work you do. Good evening. I am Ted Alejandre, your San Bernardino County Superintendent of Schools. Communicating with the public, fellow board members, the superintendent, the news media, and your community is a vital part of being an effective board member. Being able to convey key messages and effective communication is important. Tonight, communications professionals have teamed up with school board members to present a webinar on communications for successful governance teams that includes tips on working with the media. Beside the formal presentation, there is a panel discussion on the changing landscape of communications. And things certainly have changed in this era of the COVID pandemic. We hope that you find tonight's information practical and useful. Thank you for being with us this evening and for the work that you do on behalf of the students. Together, we will transform lives through education.
Well, with that, I want to welcome you all to this webinar on effective communications for successful governance teams. My name is Dennis Mobley. I'm the governance liaison for the County Superintendent of Schools. Mary Sandoval, the president of the San Bernardino County School Boards Association, apparently is having trouble logging on to the webinar, so I'll do the introduction on her behalf. The San Bernardino County Superintendent of Schools and the Inland Personnel Council are proud partners with the San Bernardino County School Boards Association to bring you a series of workshops on effective boardsmanship. This is actually the second in a series. Whether your district is at large or has trustee area election, your role on the governance team is to represent all students district-wide. Tonight's session is about relationships and communicating at multiple levels as an elected official. So what can you say? When can you say it? What can you not say? These are tough questions, but we have some ideas to share with you that you may find helpful. Our goal is to be informative, and to that end, let me introduce tonight's program. Sid Robinson is co-owner and managing partner of Robinson and Associates, LLC, a strategic communications and public relations consulting agency. Robinson has worked in strategic communications and public relations for more than 35 years. From 2002 to 2014, he was the Associate Vice President for Public Affairs at California State University, San Bernardino. Currently, he is an adjunct faculty member at Cal Poly Pomona, where he teaches in the communications department. He's also been a lecturer at Cal State San Bernardino and at Citrus College. Previously, Robinson worked in public relations positions at Fairplex, Magnet Communications, and the Los Angeles Dodgers. He is APR accredited by the Public Relations Society of America. I'll be co-presenting with Sid. I'm the governance consultant. I've worked for the San Bernardino County Superintendent of Schools office for more than 44 years in communications, legislative services, and policy review. I also have a background as a school board member. From 1987 to 2008. I served on the school board for Rialto Unified. And from 1994 to 1998, I was the president of this association. And I've served on the CSBA Delegate Assembly. And in 2005, I served as the CSBA Annual Education Conference Chair. I too have an accreditation with APR accreditation with the Public Relations Society of America. And so I will now walk you through tonight's agenda. So let me just switch back to share screen. So just going through the agenda very quickly. Communicating effectively about our public schools has never been more critical. We will spend this session talking about why this is. Our agenda today will include the role of elected officials in communicating with various publics. We'll talk about the importance of effective communication for school board members and share some strategies on how school board members can best communicate with constituents, respond to requests for information, and work with the media. And today it seems like the word media has expanded. It's not just news media, but it's social media as well. We'll give an overview of the common policies for community and media relations and considerations for how school districts formulate district policies and procedures. We have a few don'ts that we need to emphasize toward the end of this session. And we will then have a panel discussion, and we have a stellar panel that we'll introduce later on. So with this, I'll turn it over to Sid, and Sid will guide me through this part of the presentation, and take it away, Sid.
All right, Dennis, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Welcome. I'm glad that you're here with us, and I appreciate the opportunity to share a few points the types of things that I kind of cover a little bit with my classes at Cal Poly. I have kind of the unique experience of having served in public office as well as worked in public relations, communications for all of my professional career. So the role of government and elected officials in responding to information requests, public oversight of local government is certainly one of the foundations of our democracy in America. And in fact, you think of the news media as the fourth estate. It's known as that, as essentially meaning it functions as the fourth branch of government, along with executive, legislative, and judicial branches. It's the watchdog to make sure government is carried out honestly, openly, legally, and ethically. And now more than ever, the public expects transparency from elected officials and public institutions. This is definitely evident and very apparent in our public schools. As government agencies, we must respect the public's right to information and we have a responsibility to provide correct and factual information that's timely and accurate, especially in the digital age. News travels quicker than ever. Sometimes, too, Dennis, can you advance here? Yeah. News travels through unofficial and uncontrolled sources such as personal Facebook pages, Twitter, online blogs, and anything else that we can get our hands on, or how we communicate with our colleagues, friends, peers, and gosh, just anybody. To maximize the public confidence in public schools, the district needs to be the official source for news and to build relationships based on openness and credibility. And so what I'm saying with that is that your message is stronger when it comes from one voice, and the best source is the district office itself. There should be an administrative function in place. Some school districts may not have a public information officer, in which case the superintendent would fill that role. Certainly the board can be speaking, but we'll get into that in just a minute. Your message is going to be stronger if it's carried with one voice. There's less chance of it being diluted, and everyone needs to be on the same page. It's all the more effective if you speak with a single voice. If you're saying different things, then it looks like there's confusion among the board. Doesn't mean you have to agree on issues and so on. That's not what I'm saying at all. You can have differing opinions on the dais, but the last thing you want to do is to be putting down your fellow board members and your colleagues, even if you don't agree with them, or even if you don't even like them. You don't want to be pointing the finger and throwing them under the bus. Respect them, and you'll look better, your entire board will look better. And if that's the case, you're going to gain more credibility. You want it to all be accurate too. And that's part of that speaking with a single voice. You also need it to be timely. The PIO's job, if you have that function, is to work with the media. It's to work with anybody contacting. And if it's not a PIO, then somebody, the superintendent or a designee, should be the appropriate person. However, it's usually the superintendent, because that is the person who is the face of the school district. In essence, he or she is the chief operating officer or chief executive officer. It's not to say, again, that board members don't have a role. Naturally, you do. But check with your individual district policy to see about how media relations should be handled. If you're contacted by the media, it's always a good idea to let your PIO or your superintendent know, just simply so they won't be caught off guard, even if you don't comment. It's important to remember that authority rests with the board as a whole and not as an individual. Local boards are entrusted by their diverse constituents to represent the whole school community. Show commitment to providing comprehensive communication in an open, honest way. This is even more critical as many school districts have migrated to trustee area elections now. I just want to make sure I'm keeping up with our slides here. So there's really a fine balance when determining appropriate forums and times to express views that are in individuals rather than those that are reflective of the board and the district in its entirety. So when voicing an opinion as an individual, not as the collective body, it's prudent just to say that. Say, it's my personal opinion, does not reflect the opinion of the board or the district. Again, less confusion. It's important to know, to understand the mindset of a journalist. That's in the queue, yes. Journalists are typically tenacious. They have a deadline, but now that idea of a deadline is kind of, it's not a set time on the clock anymore, because it's more of a race to get the story published. And when I say published, that's not necessarily in the paper that you can read, but it's online. And who can be first to get the story before the competition, and there still is competition in the news media. The idea is to be able to present that story as quickly as they can. Sometimes accuracy may fall by the wayside. It's if they can't get a hold of the appropriate spokesperson, that might be one of the consequences. So not only do they always have a deadline, now is the deadline. Now they may let you know that it's later. Journalists now are probably working for a news group as opposed to just a single entity, a single media outlet, because the media today is grouped. So education stories are most likely assigned by an editor who wants a local angle to a regional or national type of story. So, I mean, the most obvious case that's current right now is when are schools opening? And and as we've seen since almost exactly a year ago, they've all centered around the coronavirus, and then the closures, reopenings, and the protocols that will be in place. Distance learning is a topic that wasn't spoken about in K-12, and it's now a part of our daily lives, as well as everybody in college as well. So you're going to find that journalists may have a limited knowledge about public education. Not that they don't know because they went through it, but they don't have the knowledge of the nuts and bolts of how public education functions. And so they're going to look for the story that fits their need. They're not looking for fluff. We can present the feel good stories to them, but we have to keep our fingers crossed that those are going to be the ones that they're going to focus on or evolve to, that we want them to cover. Otherwise, what they're looking for are things that may be controversy. There could be conflict, disagreement. Again, conflict is running rampant right now between groups that think that schools should be, students should be back on campuses, and those that feel that they don't want their kids back in until this whole coronavirus issue is settled. There are controversies centered around the vaccines and so on and so forth. Those are the stories that are going to be the front page news, as opposed to some of the others. So again, journalists can be tenacious, but they're also stretched thin these days too. So they may take the word of the first person who gives them an answer, as opposed to the right answer. And to follow up with that just quickly, is that the importance of responding to the news media, to a reporter, is to be able to tell your story and to tell it right and accurately. So let's take a look at Joe Journalist here. And his assignment is to get quotes before controversial action is being taken at the next meeting. And it could be anything: collective bargaining, concessions, or the timing of reopening of schools under the COVID rules. So the first person he calls is board person A, and in the conversation says, "I'm for it," and then calls person B, and "I'm for it," and then calls person C, and "I'm against it." So this reporter has talked to 3 members of a 5-person board. He has his story right now before the board even meets. So is this a violation? Is this something that, is this a Brown Act violation, that there's been essentially a decision made, or at least the voting made, before it has gone to a vote? As public officials, and I can speak as from my own experiences, we have our minds made up oftentimes before the board even meets, prior to the meeting. But it's our duty as public officials to listen to all sides of the issue, and that includes that public comment and everything that happens in those moments, truly leading up to the actual vote. You may change your mind in the course of the meeting. In this case, Joe Journalist has got it and put it out there, and he says, well, this board is for it, and his story's done. So part of what we want you to think about is, if you're contacted, is to sharpen your interview skills, is to think about when a reporter calls, to use message discipline. When you're faced with a difficult question, or one that doesn't really address your key message points that you are trying to communicate, try this approach. It's the ABCs, and think of it in that acronym: to acknowledge, bridge, and convert the question to your desired answer. So using the 3, acknowledge the reporter's statement. Sure, that's certainly important to our school. And then bridge away from that original question to one you really want to answer. So, but the bridge is, we're continuing to work on that, or we're looking into that, or I should have an answer for that, but let me tell you more about this. But the real issue today is, and it allows you by acknowledging, bridging, and then converting it, you can communicate with that third step of converting into the message, your message point that you want to communicate to the public through that channel, which is that reporter. So the example here, this is just an idea. So a reporter may ask, why do you think so many students are dropping out of high school in San Bernardino County? And your acknowledgement might be, well, our dropout rates are higher than we would like them to be. Yet, we're excited that that rate has decreased nearly, that rate has decreased by nearly 5% in the last 3 years. We're making a real difference with our initiative. So you change that from what is a negative topic, and you can talk about the positives that you're doing without really taking them off base. You have to kind of keep it in context as well. So when the media calls, and this is always the thing, people fear, and should I call them back? And I don't want to call them. Who can I have talk to them? Field the call. You are, even as a board member, field the call. Don't feel compelled necessarily to respond to a request for an interview the first time the reporter calls, but don't ignore it either. Find out the intent of the story. What type of information do they want? Who else have they talked to? And then call them back. Just because they're calling doesn't mean it's a negative thing. You could have a golden opportunity on your hands, and you have to look at it that way as well, as an opportunity to communicate your message. Understand the objectives. Reporters typically will have 3 objectives in an interview. They need the facts, they need context for the story, for it to be of interest, because they want people to read it, and they need quotes. So they want to be able to add the source and to bring that story to life. The source also lends credibility to their story, and it adds another dimension. Third item is to be prepared and to remain comfortable. That way you can set the tone and the ground rules. Don't get trapped into giving an interview unless you're ready to speak, unless you're prepared. You need to be able to have your message points at hand. Write yourself a list of questions that could possibly be asked if that's what it takes to prepare. Call the reporter back if necessary, and write down your key points. Make sure that they're in front of you so you can stay on track, and you can keep them concise, clear, and to the point. If you have them at your fingertips, you're more apt to be able to do that than if you're just speaking off the cuff. Again, use message discipline, the ABCs that we spoke of earlier. One trick I found is to stand up. If a reporter calls and you're on the phone, simply stand up, because it tends to make you focus more when you're being asked questions that might be difficult, and it allows you to get right on the point, and it keeps you from being distracted from things on your desk or other things. Don't be walking around and doing chores and doing things around your office, but stay on point, stand up, and remain focused on the questions that are being asked. And don't just answer their questions. Focus on the answers that you want to give, not just on responding to the questions they pose, because again, that would be a wasted opportunity. Think of that interview as an opportunity for you to be positive. And while you're doing so, don't repeat any negative questions they may ask, because you frame your answers in complete sentences. So but don't bring in their negative question to lead it off. Why do we think that they're dropping out? Well, I'll tell you, don't do that. Go straight to the positive, or straight to the bridge and then to the positive. Keep it simple. And this is like the key thing I tell everybody. And the first thing I tell students the first day is to remember the acronym, KISS, and it's keep it simple, stupid. And it's the best thing to remember with writing, with speaking, and certainly with dealing with the media, because there's less chance of your answer being misconstrued, misunderstood, or taken out of context. You remember there are sound bites and quotes that will come from an interview. And so if you keep it simple, you're able to manage it and to know what's being said and what's being taken from that interview. Again, be positive, and don't confuse the issue or your response by offering a lengthy statement. Don't give them more than they need necessarily, unless it is critical to the point. But if you start to confuse it, it's going to send reporters in a direction that might make the whole story inaccurate. Answer specific questions with specific answers, and That way it'll help you to be to avoid being quoted out of context. And last thing in this, well, not last, but avoid the jargon, be brief, memorable, use anecdotes, examples, stories. Don't speculate on things you don't know about. The worst thing you could do is answer something where you don't have the answer. It's okay to say, I don't know. But if you do, say, I'll get you an answer, or I'll get our spokesperson or the appropriate person to get you that answer, and then follow up to make sure that part takes place. Because it's a news story, and the news, is their job is to present, and they have to live to a standard of presenting facts and honesty and truth. And so if you are the source, that finger points at you if you're providing information that's incorrect. Watch for questions that begin with the word why. They call for an opinion. So stick to the facts of who, what, when, where, why, and how. But don't, watch for those that begin with why. Don't fall into traps, and especially with the silent treatment, because it's not uncommon for a reporter to ask a question and wait for you to answer. And you may give a quick answer and staying on point, but they may not ask anything else. And so there's that uncomfortable silence. Don't fall for that. Answer it. Be in control of your answers. Don't get strayed and just think you have to fill that dead air, if you will, or that silent period. Don't fall for the unfair comparisons. Sometimes, one of the things that I always hate too is the question that starts, well, what if, and they paint a scenario. That's usually a hypothetical situation. Well, recognize those, because those are the worst traps you can get into, because it will put you into a situation that's not even happening or true. And don't speculate, unless it's actually happening or it's a real life case. Don't go down the road of the what if. That's a real trap. Don't have to choose between two bad alternatives or those kind of questions that are negatively phrased. Watch too for when reporters try to summarize your comments. If they're try to attribute to you a summary content, just be careful and correct them if that is wrong. And always know that everything you say is on the record. And even if you think you're not on, like the school board in Northern California recently that believed that nobody was watching and paid the consequences for that. Everything's on the record. And if anytime we're on Zoom or any situation like this, you could be recorded. And again, you saw the results of that situation. Also, avoid things like saying no comment. I say it's okay to say, I don't know. It's not okay to say no comment. And the reason is you look like you're guilty and you're hiding something. And so what naturally happens is if a reporter hears no comment, the reporter is going to ask more questions or dig deeper. So, it sounds evasive. If it's a personnel matter or a legal matter, say so, but don't say no comments and say, I can't speak on this because it's a personnel issue. And usually anything that's HR related can fall into that, and that's your out right there. They're not going to dig. And most reporters, I've never had one go any deeper once I say that it's a personnel issue and I can't reel anymore. That's the end of the story. So what makes news? I think we know from reading what's going to be the newsworthy, the juicy things, turmoil, controversy, conflict. It usually creates media interest. They're trying to sell papers or have people watch their newscasts or listen to their station or look at whatever that site is where those stories are being posted. So those types of things, budget cuts, negotiations with teacher groups, labor negotiations, letters to the editor, why do they run those things that keep running back and forth and back and forth? Events that are nearby or immediate always prompts curiosity, and that's a story. It can generate news. Localized story has a lot more interest than something that's happening elsewhere, of course. If it's coming from an important source, if it's an elected official or the chief of police calls the newspaper, they're going to pay attention. You know, if it's somebody important, prominent people and things make news about how people and how events affect them. Children make news, and that's a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing too. Progress is another way that makes news. Think about the California school dashboard. That's one. Think about, obviously moving forward. What are our innovations with distance learning? What are our innovations moving forward? Graduation rates, so on and so forth, the return from COVID. Unusual and astonishing, consequential events, all those types of activities. You saw the college admissions scandal, how much news that caused just a year and a half ago, and continues to linger as people are beginning or ending their prison terms. Life and death situations clearly are news, and especially if it impacts a school. COVID, that's a life and death situation, but school shootings, God forbid, is something that we've had to deal with, and it's a reality. And that's one of the benefits of having a PIO on board, is to be able to help address when there's a situation like that, because when a crisis strikes, you need to be able to be organized and to be in place and to have people in the right spots and to be able to answer those questions. And that is the true time when you need to have the single spokesperson. Politics, of course, as you all know, politics and bureaucracy are easy targets. And, think about your board meetings. So there's news that comes out of those. Yeah. So where's the public get its news? Based on research from the Pew Research Center, this is from last year, from 2020, it's published in just this past January. Most American news consumers prefer to get their news from a screen, although it varies which kind of screen that is. It's no longer, TV is no longer the dominant screen. It's smartphones, computers, tablets, and a variety of ways like that. It's a shift from just a couple of years ago when TV was the most frequently used. Still, though, as you would expect, TV news is dramatically less among younger adults, and it's certainly newspapers, and for the use of the daily newspaper continues to decline. The trend skews heavily towards digital devices among those under 50 years old, as you would also expect. And that's more obvious as you get to the various different age ranges, as you look at the different charts. My students don't read newspapers, and I'm teaching them public relations. And I also taught reporting and news writing at Citrus. And in those classes, it's a news writing class, and they don't read newspapers, but they read the same content that appears in newspapers. They read it from a screen, typically off of their phone. So it might be a story that was generated by a reporter with the San Bernardino Sun or the Inland Valley Daily Bulletin or the Redlands Daily Facts, but they are reports that they're not reading in the paper. PR and communications professionals are turning more toward owned media to counter the loss of earned media. Owned media is our own news websites, our own websites, or a place on our websites to communicate the stories we want to communicate. We have control over those stories, whereas we have no control or less control over the stories that are published by the news media. There's a chance that that becomes the source for information, and today it is, because we can also send that out through our own social media channels as well. So we're using not just our own media, the things that we can control, and that includes not just websites, but our own publications, brochures, magazines, newsletters, and we can also use our own social media. Now, sometimes you're going to have because it is a two-way communication model, you're going to have pushback if there's a controversial issue, but those things tend to play themselves out unless you are going about it completely the wrong way and putting out a message that is bound to be sour to most people. Otherwise, they do balance themselves out. It's important to have a balanced system of communicating. And when I say that earned media still is the coverage you earn from the news media. Again, while newspaper is declining, there's still value to it. There's still value to getting coverage on television and through traditional media, but more so to bringing up the presence on owned media and social media is becoming that much more valuable. And again, as I said, part of having a good owned media presence is having a very viable news website. So I found this interesting. Just because people get their news from social media or a digital news site doesn't mean they absorb what that news is. This part of that same survey shows that those who depend on social media for their political news have lower political knowledge than most other groups, as it says in that subhead there. The point is that people who get their news this way aren't necessarily getting the whole story. So again, there is still tremendous value to traditional media and the things that we are more accustomed to. People tend to read less of a story when it's presented on a screen than in print. And that's just a human nature that's been determined. And digital stories tend to be shorter than print stories too, because they want to keep the attention and they want to keep them more along the lines of how broadcast stories are presented as opposed to print stories, which is shorter and more to the point. And they may not get into all the details, but they'll get the headline and the lead part of the story covered there. So how is this affecting us, the landscape affecting us here in San Bernardino County? For the most part, as I said, you have news groups as opposed to individual news operations. Media conglomerates now own what used to be separately owned and operated daily and weekly newspapers. So this and the growing presence of online media sources has resulted in a tremendous downsizing of newsroom staff, redundancy of news coverage. The old newsrooms that used to exist are now just basically closets compared to what they used to be. The Victorville Daily Press is owned by Gatehouse Media. They publish 156 daily papers and hundreds of community publications and websites. They are in 615 different local markets covering 39 states, 140 newspapers nationwide still, including the Desert Sun, the Desert Dispatch, the Hesperia Star, Lucerne Valley Leader. Use this slide here to show the Southern California News Group. It's owned and operated by Media News Group, the nation's second largest newspaper company and one of the largest providers of digital news and information in the US. And Southern California News Group was created about 5 years ago. The Media News Group acquired Freedom Communications and merged the Los Angeles News Group with that. And so there were existing 9 Southern California papers. Freedom Communications brought along Orange County Register and Riverside, the Press Enterprise. And so the this group now of 11 papers, includes the Daily Bulletin, the Sun, the Daily Facts, the papers I mentioned, the Press Enterprise, the Register, and many others. And you can see just by this, this is from a couple weeks ago, and the stories that appear in all of those, and the presentation is almost identical. In fact, it is identical in the Sun, the Daily Bulletin. You still see the same lead story in the Press Enterprise. That's almost identical there as well. But even Orange County Register includes the same more national story on the left. You're going to see, and on the right, and the Daily Facts, while it doesn't have the banner story, it still has that same story across the bottom. So the point being is these mergers mean that there are fewer reporters covering education stories. Most don't even have an education beat anymore, that somebody dedicated specifically to education. Though it used to be, a paper in the Daily Bulletin would have the stories from a somewhat local region, is now filled with stories about Riverside and things going on there. They've become regional papers and not local papers anymore. And so you really don't have, at least in this group of papers, what we would known as the local newspaper. There are still communities, hop over the county line to Claremont, that have the Claremont Courier, but there aren't many of those. There's still some, certainly Fontana and other communities do have their local newspapers, but those are mostly weeklies and much smaller papers. While more adults are getting their news from social media, people are more likely to see information on social media as inaccurate compared to print outlets. Both the person posting the story and the media outlet can impact how people perceive news on social media. Research conducted by Media Insight Project shows that the person posting the article has the greatest effect on opinions toward the article. So there was an experiment on a health topic, and there was the articles were shared from reputable sources such as Dr. Oz and Oprah Winfrey, and the same articles were shared with and without a reputable news source cited. And as you'd expect, the trusted person sharing an article from a reputable news source leads to the most positive beliefs about the article, and an untrusted person sharing something from an unknown news source leads to generally low credibility. But in the more complicated combinations, the study showed that the person posting the article or the original reporting source most affects the attitudes toward an article. And so the results illustrate that people who saw the article from a trusted sharer and unknown media source have much more positive opinions of the article than those who saw the story from a distrusted sharer and a reputable news source. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dennis for a bit.
Okay, thank you, Sid. And we're going to move along a little more quickly. I do want to respond to one question in the chat, which is, will these slides be available? Later this week, we will post it to the San Bernardino County Superintendent of Schools website. In that website, there's a tab that you can go to for the San Bernardino County School Boards Association, but give us a few days so that we can get that up for you. So I want to talk a little bit about the communications mindset for a board member, and really a key role, important thing for you to remember is that you are key advocates for the district. You are district ambassadors. And in doing so, you advocate for the district students, staff, and the programs that you operate. In doing so, you're to think of building positive relationships within the school community with your school district and neighboring school districts as well. For sound communication practices for board members are critical to building trust in the community and support for public education. We've touched this a little bit before already. Demonstrate credibility and transparency for the board and for the organization. Send a clear message and one that's consistent about the district on key issues impacting public education. And we're going to emphasize a little bit some of the best ways to do this later in the presentation, but having a clear and consistent message is so important. Also, there are ways that you can influence legislation and policy through professional organizations. Certainly in California, so much of the rules and of engagement, if you will, are edicts from the state in terms of state legislation. Also, this past year, we've had a number of executive orders from the governor. And so you have the California School Boards Association. In fact, this week they're having their legislative week. And so that's a good way to connect. If you've not already registered, I'm sure Flint, who will be on later on, Flint Troy with CSBA can tell you how to do that. We also have our member organizations. We have participants in this webinar from both San Bernardino and Riverside County. You have active school board associations. Those are listed there. In San Bernardino County, you also have the San Bernardino County District Advocates for Better Schools. So we call it SANDABs. And the executive committee consists of 9 district superintendents, 9 school board members, and the county superintendent. And they actively follow legislation, both the state and federal level. And it's a very active, they're actively engaged in a lot of the legislative issues that are important to public education. And I would point out that responsible communication is really embedded in CSBA's professional governance standards. You understand that the authority does rest with the board, and it's not with individuals. Although you run your campaign, you're elected as individuals. Most districts have 5-member boards. And so it really is a board that takes action, not individuals. We've talked about this before, communicating with a common vision. Operate openly with trust and integrity. And we'll talk about that, some don'ts later on in the presentation about that. And support the actions of the board, even if you're in the minority. You know, the board voted to go in a different direction. So it's important to support that and move forward and not try to dig up old wounds and revisit issues that have long since been decided. Look over your district policies in terms of looking at how to be an effective communicator. There's many areas that your own board policies can provide a great deal of guidance. Most districts follow the CSBA model of government management using technology, their sample policy service. And Silver Valley has done that. Silver Valley Unified is in the high desert area of San Bernardino County. Karen Gray is a board member who's part of our panel later on, but they have posted their policies online. So the 9,000 series of board policies focus what we call the board bylaws. So you've got the role of the board. It also looks at the role of the board and the superintendent in terms of roles and responsibilities. Policy 9005 is governance standards. Public statements or public comments, community, working with the community is covered in 9010. You have, they have a policy on board member electronic communications. And we'll be talking about a few don'ts, areas to be very cautious about later in the presentation. There's a code of ethics and also policy on meeting conduct. These are all important areas as you build effective communication for successful governance teams. So with that, I'll turn it back to Sid.
Well, open and effective two-way communications with the community and the media are the foundation of the CSBA sample policies for community and media relations. Depending on the size and culture of a school district. Policy and particular procedures can vary. I encourage you to become familiar with your district policy because it should serve as the outline for your protocols. Also should identify who the district spokesperson is and the point of contact for media inquiries and public information requests. Generally, communicating with the media and responding to requests for information is an administrative function, meaning it should be directed back to the district office, either to the PIO or to the superintendent, for that person, the designated person, to be the spokesperson and to work from that point out. Again, as I said earlier, it doesn't mean you can't have your opinion and voice those, but generally speaking, communicating with the media is the job of the district office. So does your district have a communications plan that outlines strategies for consistent and clear messaging? Does your district have a PIO? Dialogue between the superintendent and board regarding communication protocols can establish clear guidance in terms of when it's appropriate for a board member to respond to an inquiry and when that inquiry should be referred to the district. So most of those things should be outlined if your district has a policy. Again, most instances refer those inquiries to the district office. If it is a matter appropriate for a board response, it's recommended that school boards designate an official spokesperson, and in most cases, that would be the board president. So just as a bit of a review here are top 5 communication tips for board members. Speak with one clear voice. Part of the board member's responsibility is to ask questions, seek answers to issues brought before the board, but you can't be expected to make unanimous decisions all the time. But once you have reached a decision, it's best to speak with one collective voice. Demonstrate commitment by adhering to board governance standards that are supported by effective communications. Regardless of the question, comment, or news story, board member comments should adhere to the highest standards of ethical conduct. Filter reporter questions from the seat of a board member, meaning consider how your response on a particular issue could impact the board, the district, students, staff. You're part of the district team. And so you're not there to publicly criticize the staff or the team. So handle those issues privately if you're able to. Be conscientious of upcoming board agenda items and district specific issues when responding to reporter questions. Be prepared. Although board members are in a leadership role, you can't be expected to know everything all the time. Call upon advisors, the superintendent, the communications office, the staff, the associate superintendents, anybody who can provide you with more information. And again, don't feel the need to immediately respond to a story or say too much too soon. It's best to be meticulous about it, think through, do your homework, and get the information right. Message development in crafting key messages is about knowing what you want to say. These are examples of message points with respect to the California School Dashboard. They're just individual messages here. I mean, they're basic points, more than a single number. Equity supports local decision making, and they're general statements. But you back those up with proof points, the evidence that says that. So more than a single number, your proof point is that quality education is defined by more than just a single test score. Equity, so on. You can read what they are. The point is to have your key message, have your proof points, your subset messages that support your key message, and then repeat your key message after that. Managing the interview. As we said earlier, and again, this is a little bit of review, everything is on the record. Return calls and email, any requests from a reporter. Be prepared to bridge your answer from the question to your answer. Know who the reporter is, know what the news outlet is. It's okay to say, I don't know. It's not okay to say no comment. Don't speculate. Be concise, be concrete, avoid jargon. Don't volunteer unnecessary information if it's going to make the story convoluted and confusing to the reporter. And don't throw the staff under the bus. There is a long-held belief that the media dwell too much on the negative and are quick to report about all the problems taking place in our public schools. And so we need to remember that part of the media's role is to be a watchdog and to report the news, even when it's not favorable. And not everything that comes from our school district is going to be positive. But the truth is, working cooperatively with the news media is an opportunity to enhance public reporting about our schools. News media serve an important role in communicating education issues and progress to our school and communities that can significantly influence the community's understanding of our school programs. This obviously extends today to citizen journalists, social media, bloggers, and so on. And those are not the official sources for the district news, but it's important too that they can understand what the true story is. Just be aware of and understand all these sources and take the opportunity to use the correct channels to inform and educate the public with accurate information about our schools, whether that's test scores, budget issues, the return from COVID, and so on. It's also about cooperation. And the best way to get positive media attention is through cooperating with reporters and not brushing them off. If you or your PIO is accessible, that's a key. You know, a reporter is going to treat your district or your organization better if you can build, or your key people can build the rapport and the relationship with the reporter. So being accessible, responding in a timely manner, being accurate, don't provide information that's wrong, provide information that is true and accurate, be honest with them. There are times where you can't tell the whole story, but as public agencies, you know, transparency is what the world wants and wants to see and expects. And so, you know, as far as you can go, yeah, personnel matters. You can't necessarily reveal those, but you can be honest about everything else. There are great benefits from working with the media in a cooperative manner. One, it is the credibility that your story will bring. Media is going to deliver a more credible message than those that are delivered through social media and other forms of communication. There's a value proposition here that is that if it's covered by the media, in essence, they are providing a third-party endorsement. They may not necessarily endorse you, but the fact that what you are providing as your story is newsworthy is in essence an endorsement. And positioning, because it's news, it's value, and it allows you to communicate the message points that you want to communicate, allows you to position your district, your messages the way you want to position those. Dennis, it's tag team time.
Okay. and this is where I have the grim news to report. Well, I don't know if you take it as grim news, but there are changes in legislation, and there are changes to the Brown Act that affect the use of social media. Effective just this past January, AB 992 authorizes individual board members or council members to have conversations with public, social media and whatnot. And they can do so within the subject matter jurisdiction of the legislative body. You know, as elected officials, board members have certain individual freedoms when it comes to expressing positions on a particular issue. However, as a member of a governing body, you have tremendous ability to take a stand on issues with a common voice. But there's a caution there. A quorum or a majority of the board members may not use social media to discuss among themselves any matter within the board's jurisdiction. And this even goes farther to state that an individual board member is prohibited from responding or reacting, like likes or emojis, posting a comment from any other board member. This includes social media platforms like Facebook and the like, and it may even extend to some of the Zoom and WebEx type of meetings that we all participate in. So it's listed as a caution because that could be an issue. Another area that I want to just touch on briefly is the California Public Records Act, the PRA. And your devices you have can be subject to disclosure under a Public Records Request Act. Excuse me. And there are a few exceptions, but the point is that a decision by the court means that if a district employee or official is conducting district business on his or her personal account, cell phone, computer, or by other electronic means, such records might be responsive to a Public Records Act request. If most of you as school board members probably have an email account with the district, sometimes it's not always convenient, too many accounts, too many passwords, but keep it separate. Don't you rely on personal devices, personal emails to conduct school board business. So another thing that just want to emphasize is to communicate concerns with the superintendent in advance of board meetings. If you have a question, maybe you get your board packet and you have a question that's related to budget or facilities or some other issue, contact the district office, talk with the superintendent or his designee, and maybe talk through the issue. And it may be that that's something that could be discussed by the full board as a question, and the district's officials are prepared for that. Another thing I would emphasize is that if you do get a call from the media, alert the district of the media inquiry and the topic and what you talked about. It just gives them a heads up that especially if they're doing what Joe, journalist, did earlier, and he's contacting board member A, then board member B, and board member C. And he may include some information, but not other information. But this way you can let the district office know what you talked about and what your response was. Know your role as an individual board member. Know that you're part of a governance team, and so work at communications. Avoid serial trap meetings. And remember that the ultimate mission is to put students first. Came across a quote actually just earlier today that I thought was interesting. As Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw once penned, "The biggest single problem in communications is the illusion that it has taken place." So with that, we'll go to questions from our chat box. I'm going to go ahead and exit our screen share at this time. I would point out that we've answered a few of the questions. Troy Flint has been very kind to post some website references where to find the governance standards, and also, let's see, CSBA's publications and resources. I don't see any other questions in the chat box at this time. So let me just go ahead now and go into the introduction of our panel. We will conclude the webinar with discussion with our panelists. So I've already introduced Sid Robinson. We also have Jesus Holguin. Jesus has served the Moreno Valley Unified School District Governing Board since November 2002. He served on the CSBA's Delegate Assembly, served on the Director of Region 18. He also served as CSBA President from 2014 to 2015. He's been an officer with the California Latino School Boards Association and president of the Riverside County School Boards Association. He is employed by the San Bernardino County Superintendent of Schools since 1985, and he's extensive background and experience in school finance. Welcome, Jesus. Karen Gray was initially appointed to the vacated seat on the Silver Valley Unified School District Board of Trustees in June of 2001. The electorate has allowed her to continue public service on the school board for 4 consecutive terms. In addition to local board duties, she serves on the California School Boards Association Board of Directors representing Region 16, which is San Bernardino and Inyo counties, the San Bernardino County School Boards Association Executive Committee, San Bernardino District Advocates for Better Schools, that's SANDEBS again, and participation with the National Association of Federally Impacted Schools. Our fourth panelist is Troy Flint. He is CSBA's Director of Communications and Public Information Officer. In this role, he oversees the functions of the Communications Department and develops strategies and results-oriented communication programs that successfully support the association objectives. Flint brings 17 years of experience in communications, public relations, public affairs, and print journalism to this position. In his previous role, Flint served as the Oakland Unified School District's Director of Communications. So welcome to all of our panelists. And so let's dive right in. First question, and I'm going to direct this first to our board members. So Jesus and Karen, if you would unmute. And the question is this: there are several different levels of communication: board member to superintendent, board member to other board members, and board to the community. What does effective communications for successful governance teams mean to you, and how does it work? Jesus?
Yes, thank you, Dennis. Thank you so much, and good evening, all. And thank you for the opportunity to be in this panel along with Troy Flint and Karen Gray and Sid Robinson. It's an honor for me to be here, and with you too, Dennis Mobley. So communication, is critical. As a board member, I think it is important to be well informed and also be able to deliver the messages that need to be delivered to the superintendent. It has to be an open communication with the superintendent all the time, which in my case I have. I'm very lucky, very fortunate to have that open communication, and also with my colleague board members. But we have to be careful. You mentioned already the Brown Act, and we have to be careful how that communication takes place between board members. So we try to stay away from that direct communication and to avoid falling into those little gray areas that may become a violation of the Brown Act. And then there's the communication to the community. And I think the most important thing to maintain that communication, even within the board members, is to have that open communication with the superintendent. But then there's another piece that comes behind that, and that is as critical as the first one, and that is to be able to listen what is happening, listening to the superintendent, listening to the community, listen to the other board members through the communication, through the superintendent. And it is important to know to really be careful as we listen what the community is asking for, so that we can respond in the most effective manner through the superintendent. You mentioned already there has to be one single voice, and that single voice is the superintendent in our case. So all that response to the community through the superintendent has to be clear, has to be credible, has to be transparent all the time. Now, in our case, and I don't want to go too long, but the superintendent provides information to the board every Friday. I believe that's the case in all of the districts. But the Friday memo has a lot of information for all of us to be informed, well informed. We know exactly what is happening through the entire community, through the entire school district. So we go through the Friday memo, and we're well informed. In addition, the superintendent places phone calls to the community so that the community knows what is happening too. We get those calls, we listen to those calls, and that piece of communication 2-3 times a week to the community maintains that open communication and allows the community to know that the superintendent and the school district entirely is working for students. So I'm going to stop there for now.
And Karen, same question.
So I think, Jesus answered it. I would go a little farther in saying, clarity is very important. If you picture a Venn diagram where they have you, and then you have your governance team, and then you have your school community, and then the larger community, and it's about clarity in understanding the circumstances and turning around. We learned in Masters in Governance, when you're a board member, turn around and look at it from the public's view or from the person that you're communicating with. And if you're clear on the facts and you're able to distinguish between your perspective, the district perspective, and why each of those are important, but it is very important as a board member to stay on the same team. You don't want to create controversy where there is none. As we've done these trainings, one of our kind of slogans has been, boring is beautiful. We do not want to create drama for the media. We want to communicate facts, support learning kids and staff, and be able to clearly articulate issues no matter who that audience is. And that type of communication will be different depending on whether it's verbal, whether it's internal, whether it's social media, or as Sid discussed, working with the print media and other agencies like that. So I guess clarity on who you're talking to, clarity on what you're conveying to them, and then making sure that you take the time to articulate well so that we don't misconstrue the message. Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you, Karen. Troy has already provided the links to the governance standards, but maybe you could still comment on the professional governance standards for school board members. It's a quick read guide that looks at the role of individual board members, the board as a body, and the board and superintendent as a governance team. But tell us about it and why those principles are so important.
Sure. First of all, I'd just like to congratulate you and appreciate you, and also Sid for your presentation tonight. I think you touched on a lot of the themes that really run through the professional governance standards. And the standards, you shouldn't be intimidated by that. I know it sounds like a big title, but it is really about a 2-pager. Sorry, you hear kids in the background. This is pandemic life. But it's a 2-pager. It doesn't try and exhaustively list every single thing you should do as a board member, nor could we ever hope to do that. But it just tries to group them into big buckets. As you mentioned earlier, we have actual policies that provide more guidance on the details of how board members should conduct themselves. But what this tries to do is give an overview of how you should proceed and where you should focus, both as an individual trustee and also as a member of a board, and kind of lays out what the specific roles of a school board member are. And there's some overlap between how you behave as a trustee and what you need to focus on as part of the collective board, but there are some differences. And so when you're talking about an individual trustee, always you need to keep learning and achievement as your number one focus. And I would say along with that, the social and emotional well-being of students, because that's a precondition for learning and for them becoming successful citizens. In some ways that sounds obvious, but as I think board members know, it's really easy to get distracted by the politics. I don't think it's ever been more true than it has been over the last year with COVID, with the different viewpoints people have about the virus, with the different viewpoints people have about whether it's safe to return to school and under what conditions, and just in general with the additional level of scrutiny that schools are under. So it's important that people know that you're keeping learning and achievement and the well-being of students first. If they don't believe that, then they won't accept the decisions you're making, and they're going to be that much more critical when things don't go perfectly. Secondly, we want all our board members to be advocates for education for public schools. That occurs first on a local level. That's your ultimate responsibility as people who have fiduciary responsibility for the school district, and also just general responsibility for the well-being of students while they're in your care. But I think increasingly there's a larger role. Of course, I'll say this since I work for CSBA, but I think on a state level, there's a lot of need to call attention to funding issues, whether it's issues of mandates, whether it's the fact that we have pretty much the worst student teacher ratios or staff teacher ratios in the country. There are a lot of constraints that are limiting our outcomes and what we can do for students. That's not to say local districts or organizations at the state level like CSBA are blameless, but we do ourselves a disservice if we don't paint a picture of what's going on locally and at the state level and advocate for the resources and the conditions our kids need to achieve. So I think board members have a dual role in terms of local governance and then also in terms of advocacy on a broader level. And that advocacy can occur on a local level too. I mean, that could be bonds, it could be forging partnerships with community-based organizations to supplement what you can do within the district. There are a lot of ways you can do it, and it doesn't have to be explicitly political, like supporting a ballot measure, but certainly that's one high-profile way to do it. Another one, which is really important and I think has come up a lot lately, is respecting differences. As Sid mentioned in his comments, we've had a few really embarrassing situations. I mean, we don't really need to go into that because those are more common sense issues than governance issues in terms of how people conducted themselves. But I do think nerves are frayed right now. Again, like I said, I don't think there's ever been this much attention on schools in my time here in the mainstream media, certainly. And parents are probably more upset than they've ever been, or at least a group of parents who might not normally be involved are now engaged in a way they haven't been. And so that's a lot of pressure. And we have to remember that, everybody, even the most difficult parent, is generally fighting for what they think is right for their kid, at least, and maybe for kids generally. Some of them are wrong, but I mean, they're coming from a good place. And so we need to respect those differences. And that will put you in a better position in the long run. The next one talks about acting with dignity and integrity. I think we already covered that, so I won't belabor that point. The next new point is confidentiality. And again, like Sid mentioned in his comments, that can be frustrating, particularly when you're dealing with the press. I can't tell you how many times some action was taken against a beloved staff member or teacher. And when I was working in Oakland, and the school jammed the board room, one demanding an answer, or people caught you in the hallway or on your way to the car. Why did you get rid of Mrs. Johnson, our most beloved teacher, or something like that? There's any number of issues. And people will make accusations or claims about what happened. Some of them may not be accurate, or some of them may be made up entirely, but you can't compromise that confidentiality. Same with the school board member. You make a lot of decisions about personnel, about expulsions, suspensions, other things. And there's a reason why you have to keep that cone of silence. Sometimes it will work against you in the court of public relations because you'll look evasive. Although sometimes it's great to be able to have that. Because you don't want to get into it publicly. So it can go either way, but that is a legal responsibility that you have to keep. Another one, which also kind of plays into what CSBA likes to offer, is professional development. We tell our kids we're preparing them to be lifelong learners. We expect the same of the adults who are in governance positions. Even the most experienced school board member can learn and grow according to what the current situation is. They can get new information to help master that. Every year, I mean, it's difficult for me. I get paid to keep up on all the new laws, and I have to really study them. And some of them I still forget because there's just so many laws passed related to education. I think our lobbyists, our advocates right now are tracking something, I think more than 70 bills that impact education. Most of those won't be passed, of course. Some of them won't even get out of committee, but that just shows you where you start from. And so there's always more to learn. I've been in this, I should have updated my bio. I think it says 17 years. It's been longer than that now, unfortunately. But I realized when you were reading 17 years, I was like, it's probably more like 22 now. I probably should update my bio. But things have changed so much in the approach to education. I think especially when it comes to the social and emotional piece, and I think how much emphasis is put on that positive school culture and our ability to create a space where students can learn and feel valued and safe. That's a big area, I think, for professional development for longtime school board members. Things like the dashboard, LCFF, are constantly changing. If you took our master's in governance course, say more before LCFF, which was, what was that, 2013, it's probably almost a whole new course now, or at least certain sections are, just because the landscape has changed so much. So you just need to stay abreast of developments. The next issue is also a very tricky one, respecting board and staff roles. I know a lot of people think, not a lot of people, but there's a good amount of the public that thinks, oh, you're on the board, you're my friend, or I voted for you, you should be able to do this, fire that teacher, or tell the superintendent to do this, or just really micromanage at a lower level down into the organization. The board does hire and have the right to fire the superintendent, but a successful board is not supposed to be managing staff. That direction should go through the superintendent, and the superintendent should push it down through the organization. And if the board over time develops a sense of distrust or a lack of confidence that the superintendent can manage staff according to the policies and protocols and is not living up to the vision of the board, then they need to address that with the superintendent. And if the superintendent can't correct it, then maybe they need to make a decision about whether he or she should remain with the district. But if the board is constantly directing staff to do things, that's a breakdown in the system, and they're stepping outside the role of proper governance. And then finally, for trustees, we just want to remind you that the authority rests with the board as a whole, not just you as an individual member. Increasingly, again, and I keep coming back to examples from the COVID era, but it's just really highlighted the potential pitfalls if you're not applying these principles. And there was a district in Southern California where a board member was speaking in a meeting that was taped and followed by the press. And she was representing opinions as if they were from the board, and they were her own opinions, which contrasted dramatically with how the board would have framed it, created a media controversy, and the board member is now subject to a recall campaign, and the board itself has had to try and distance itself from them, and it just overshadows the work that's been done and undermines trust in the district. So I'll leave it there. I'm sorry that was very long, but thank you for bearing with me.
Yeah, certainly, an acquired skill that is very valuable is to listen. And very often when you're in the community, you have to, you meet people, not maybe so much today as past years where you could go to the grocery store without a mask and congregate and whatnot. But I think it's important really to listen first and then speak. But let's go back to our topic at hand, communications. And this year it's hard to talk about, and we've already kind of touched on this area, but talk about communications without another C word, COVID. 1 year ago, a series of state and federal executive orders pushed us into lockdowns with stay-at-home orders. Weeks turned into months, months turned into the rest of the school year and beyond. A handful of schools got waivers to reopen, but for everyone else, distance learning has been the norm. After much debate with Assembly Bill 86, That was signed into law on March 5th, and there's a renewed push with state dollars to reopen schools, elementary first and then secondary schools. The purpose of this panel discussion is to discuss communications, not policy. So going back to our board members, I'll start first with Karen. This past year, how has the nature of communications changed with staff, the board, and community? What has worked well and what didn't?
So for the hard line, where we're going and what's coming out of the state and what's coming out of the CDC and the county office, all of that came from staff, the superintendent, and he had an appointed individual who managed all of that circumstance and digested it and then ensured that the message went out. We started very early last spring and then through the summer. And for communication for COVID and restarting, we relied heavily on social media and on surveys with our parents, and then penetrated that information out. The board's main guidance when all of this began was to work with our families, survey the families, see what they wanted. We knew that there was going to be a certain number of students who didn't want to come back to school, and the parents didn't want them back in the classroom. There were going to be some families that were counting heavily on the schools to be able to make sure they could feed their family. So I think in this circumstance, what really changed for us is that social media aspect. And while none of us are necessarily, meaning the school board members, are necessarily putting out a lot of words in social media, we're all most certainly monitoring it, sharing it, speaking to it. And the most important thing is to ensure our families know what the circumstances are, where we're going, what opportunities, and to communicate with staff so that we can provide services that our family needs.
Jesus, Moreno Valley and Riverside County, how has the nature of communications changed in your district?
I think from the beginning, it was very important for the school district, for the board and the superintendent to make sure that people knew what was happening, mentioned earlier. But the one thing that you mentioned over and over is the social media. There were a lot of messages in social media, and people were getting confused with what is true, what is not true, what is happening. So it was important to keep an eye on those messages, but also send the accurate message so that people knew, this is coming from the school district, from the superintendent. This is the real information. And also with all that information coming from the state, from the federal government, the CDC and many other agencies, what does that mean to our district? What does that mean to our community? So translating that into a message that the community could understand, that the students could understand, that the parents could understand, so that they knew exactly what that meant at our level, in our community. That was very important. So the communication at the beginning of this pandemic, was almost on a daily basis, going out text messages, social media, email messages, letters to parents. The one thing to remember is that schools were closed, so nobody was at the schools. Apparently, nobody was at the schools. So the families were completely lost. They didn't know what was happening. That's when the communication was critical, so that they knew the school district is keeping an eye on all these things. And we are communicating to all of you what is happening so that you know what the steps are being taken, even when we didn't know what was happening, what was going to happen next week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks on, or how long was this going to take. So the communication had to be there continuously. And as we moved through the process, the communication started, switching from every day to 3 times a week, but still keeping the community informed that the district is working. One of the things that worked immediately was the lunches, the meals for the students, the grab and go. So it was important for the district to communicate to the community. Every school, every site has grab and go. So you need to go. And along with that, there's some other pieces that could be added to the grab and go, information, flyers, or, when we came to the devices, students needed devices to get into the learning, and the devices were being distributed at the grab and go points. But all that communication had to be there again, 3 times a week. Later it changed to 2 times a week, but still the communication continues. And then the other important piece was for the district to provide the community with one central point where they could go for information, where they could go for answers, because there was a lot of questions. They could go to this one central point. There was a public information individual we have an excellent public information officer. So there was an email address distributed all over town so that people knew, you have a question, go to this email address, go to the webpage, or go to this central location where you can find the information. If something is confusing in social media, this is where you can find the real information, because this is what the district is doing. This is how the district is translating the information from higher sources, and this is exactly what it means to us. So it was important to keep an eye on those social media messages, translate immediately, so that the information was accurate, timely, and giving the people the confidence that the school district continues working, the school district continue providing the learning process for the students, the grab meal, the devices, and many other things, information for the parents, and all the different alternatives that were there. So that was critical for us from the beginning and still there today.
I'm going to pose the same question to our professionals, Sid and Troy, but I'm going to modify just a little bit, because you have the nature of communications has changed. But as communication professionals, what kinds of things did you do to manage that change? Prior to COVID, you had tried and true systems in place. COVID changed that. How did you manage that process? Let me start with Sid.
Well, the organizations that I've worked with, including county schools, I think the process, again, as we evolve from more traditional media, still using and relying on that. I don't know that it's changed. It was just the focus, the themes of the kind of communications were more, and has been mentioned, transparency, consistency, frequency, with a tone of understanding. And because the people at all aspects, students, teachers, families, people in the community we're all, and have been for the past year, making tremendous sacrifices. So that tone needed to be in pretty much everything that has been communicated. Some of the things that I saw in the different areas certainly was with Superintendent Alejandre, and for a extended period, providing weekly updates, video updates, messages every week, and a message coming out. And that's because, and it continues to be, although it's starting to stabilize, but the situation has been so fluid from the start, and it continues to be. There were districts that were approved for the waiver for their elementary schools, made plans to move forward, in fact, had childcare and special education back in session, and then had to shut it all down because of the trends and the fluidity of the COVID situation. So again, the message has consistently had to be, things are changing. And so what we tell you today may not be true tomorrow, and then to be able to tell them that again tomorrow. One of the issues too, I think, is that, typically during the course of what we would think of as the normal time, you get to tell a lot of success stories and the happy stories, the great things that are happening at schools, and the messages had to change a little bit. Sure, as Jesus talked about the meals and the distribution that was informative, but it was also a great success story too, and how that was managed. When this started, the whole concept of distance learning from the educator's side was quite confusing, and it was probably just as much, if not more, of a challenge for them as it was for the students. But everybody was in the same boat, having to try to fly the plane and put it together at the same time. So I think by being able to do those things that I said before, transparency, consistency, frequency, and understanding, those being the themes that I think those are key. providing resources for people to be able to navigate it on their own as well. Frequently asked questions, Q&A type of documents that could be posted. So those many questions people might have could be hopefully answered right there. Even staff, people weren't populating district offices in the levels that they were. People were working at home. So trying to be as accessible and available as possible while not on site. I think everything that was communicated to, the fingers pointed at the districts by the parents who wanted their kids back in school. And I think it was important to communicate that, we're not making this up. This is coming from a higher level. And a lot of people simply just didn't want to understand that this was out of the hands of the people who are at the local level. And so just to continue with those consistent messages in everything.
So let me turn it over to Troy. And CSBA is a statewide organization. You throw in county offices and school districts, you probably have about 1,000 members. Smallest district is probably just a few dozen kids, serves a few dozen. Largest district serves hundreds of thousands. So you got quite a range. So how, as a statewide organization, how was the management of information and the changing nature of communication, how did that work with a statewide organization?
Well, like Sid said, definitely frequency of communication increased dramatically because it was just, at first there was so much confusion, and then subsequently there was a lot of misinformation. There was a lot of information which was contradicted by a subsequent directive, sometimes only in a matter of weeks or even days. So we started, we probably have increased the number of, we call them blasts, basically the number of emails we're sending to membership almost 3 times from what it was pre-COVID. And yes, some people do complain, and we kind of agonize over where is the line, but we made the decision to err on the side of too much information, as long as it's accurate information, because people were hungry for guidance and to understand what was going on, because they were receiving so many inquiries from their public, from their staff, from their students. So frequency definitely increased. We've used a lot more video. We've done a lot more webinars. I think people really appreciate the explanatory quality of a webinar and the ability to ask questions. Those have been very popular on topics like when the state budget was released, any of the major guidances that have come from California Department of Public Health or CDE, of course, the recent legislation, AB and SB 86. So that's something that I think we're going to continue to do, and we'll take over into the post COVID era. Definitely expanding the reach. So we used to send a lot of our publications only to our delegates. For those who aren't active in CSBA and don't know our governance structure, we have about 20 regions, and each of those regions has a number of delegates based on the student population of the region they represent. So obviously, LA County will have more, and Siskiyou will have less, and others are in between. And that group has about 250 CSBA members throughout the state. And we used to prioritize them for education, for information. But now we're no longer really having that dividing line in information between delegates and the membership, because everybody has that need for rapid information, and we kind of remove the filter. We used to rely a little bit more on our board of directors, which is about 30 members, or that 250 member delegate body. But now we're going straight to the people that need the information, because we can't chance anything getting lost in the game of telephone, or we need to pay attention to the need for timely communication. So those are our big changes as well. We've also tried to sort of run interference or make the case for the challenges that school districts are having and what they require from the state. we always do that, but we've tried to do it a lot more now because this is really the first time that every school district has had the same issue, right? Almost every other issue is on the sidelines, or it's at least only tangential to the main concern. What are you doing to educate kids and to take care of kids during COVID? What are you taking to get ready? What are you doing to get ready for their return to campus? And then how are you going to make up for whatever loss or trauma has been suffered while they've been out of school? So those same three questions, everybody in the state is dealing with, you know, from Arcata down to Anaheim, and that's almost never the case. So it has made it easier for us to speak on behalf of all our membership. And that's not to say all the membership is approaching this in the same way. I mean, we have districts that have been in school continuously since October, some of them even high school students. And then we have districts that may not even go back this year. Or if they do, it probably won't be until almost May. So there's a wide variety, but everybody is grappling with the same issues, even if they have different solutions. So that's allowed us to go on news programs. We've definitely done a lot more pitching to local media in all the major markets and a lot of the smaller ones. And one thing we haven't done yet, but we're going to be debuting here over the next month or so, is a campaign to really highlight what school board members have done, the challenges they faced, and how against really long odds with not enough resources, not enough guidance, and not a lot of support, you've been able to do amazing things, providing, in some cases, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of meals to families that were in danger of not eating or not eating well because they wouldn't have access to the normal school lunch. Districts have been purchasing cell phone towers to amplify wireless signals. So kids in homes that are in remote areas or who can't afford it normally can get service. Districts have been buying hotspots and mounting them on buses and parking those buses in parts of the city. They've launched virtual mental health and counseling programs to give kids those services that normally they might get at school, or to try and see if there's abuse or something in the home, where normally that would happen just through the regular course of the day, but they've tried to find a way to do that even remotely. And it's not a success story in every area, but there's so many really great illustrations of what school districts have done and county offices have done to serve students. And so we're going to be highlighting that with a marketing and advertising campaign because we think, one, you deserve the recognition, but two, it's about solidifying the place of school boards, of elected school boards as a key cog in American democracy. I did an interview the other day where I talked to a guy from the Bay Area public radio station, and San Francisco Unified has been the source of a lot of controversy. They haven't reopened yet. They had a proposal to rename about 40 schools, which was unpopular with some people, and some people saw it as a distraction from the business of reopening. So they've been in the news with a lot of critical coverage recently. And there's a movement down there. I don't know how big it is, but to replace the elected school board with appointed officials. And I only bring that up to point out that if we don't establish and be very vocal about what we've done and the important role that elected school districts play, people will use this opportunity, their frustration over their kids not being in school, as a way to attack school boards. There are people out there who are very committed to the idea of removing elected school boards, who see that as an impediment, who don't respect local control. And so one thing that we've tried to do in our communications is establish that the school board member is the closest you're ever going to get to an elected official, pretty much. I mean, every 2 weeks, more or less, or in some remote areas, maybe they're only meeting once a month, you can go down there to the school board and you can give them hell if you want. And these days, you don't even have to leave your bedroom. You can be on your laptop and participate in the meetings. So if you remove that for an appointed board, you are really depriving people of their connection to their schools and to the political process. So I think we just really want to focus on highlighting that boards have done a lot given what they've had to work with, which is, pretty thin gruel, I would say.
Thank you, Troy. Let's do a kind of a quick round robin on this next question. And again, the purpose is to discuss communications and not policy. But with 33 school districts in San Bernardino County, and I think 23 in Riverside County, each with a different reopening plan. And a lot of that is driven by local circumstances that are different in each district. What tools are you using to communicate what your district is doing and why? So Karen, your mic is off, so I'll let you go first.
Yeah, as I said, we have relied heavily on social media to communicate. We also have our sites in charge of their communities. So they're using the school messenger system, they're using email, they're using Zoom. And then from the district, we have put out press releases, but we're mostly using social media to direct right into our community.
Okay. Jesus, same question.
As I mentioned before, the superintendent has continued those phone calls to the families twice a week now with pieces of information, the most relevant at the moment, so that the phone calls are not that long, but long enough to provide a piece of information that is important at that point in time. And also, there is messages going out to the parents, email messages, text messages, wherever is possible. And then there's a website where parents can go and look for that information. Some parents may not have access to email. So all those messages are being stored in that website where people can go and read those messages. And there's a whole list of messages there that have been sent out. And I think that another piece that I need to mention is that every site, there's staff working at every site. The principal and teachers and classified people are working at the sites. So it is important for the people to know that if they have any question, they can go directly to the principal or to the site and talk to somebody there, or they can go directly to the superintendent's office, or they can go to the public information officer. So there's several points where people can get information. And that communication is still going on, again, twice a week today. And then the other piece is there is a continuous recognition of great things happening in the district. There's recognition of students, recognition of programs, competitions are taking place. A lot of activities still happening, even through the virtual world. There's still a lot of activities. So every time there is an activity, the community is informed. There's a concert, there is a speech competition, something that is happening, and then there's the award ceremony. So all that information is going on to the community. So the district is continuously moving, and whenever there is an opportunity, there is a piece about the reopening, or there is a piece about the plan, there is a piece about what is happening here. In addition to that, of course, the school board meetings. The school board meetings are being, public. So as Troy said, you can go to the board meeting, you can make your comments, but you can also see the superintendent is provided a full report every single board meeting, a full report. I mean, there's tons of slides where you can see all the little details that the superintendent is looking into as we move through the process to establish the small cohorts, to give the testing, to all kinds of aspects of the educational system. So there's a whole array of ways of getting information from the school district, and every one of them is being heavily used to make sure that the community knows that the district is still there serving the students. So whoever thinks that the district is closed and everybody's on vacation, they haven't looked at anything that has been published out there, but there is a lot of activity happening. I mean, people are just putting tons of hours of work. Administrators are working really hard. Classified people are working there at the sites. Certificated people are working some of the sites, some from home. Everybody is very active in the district. And the superintendent and his team are relying that information continuously to the entire community.
So let me just turn to Sid and Troy, just a quick response. Did they miss anything, any other things that might be part of a communication plan that a district would use during this time? Sid?
I think that you mentioned right away that the best and most effective is the most direct, and that's been through email, because that's what everybody gets. People get their information from who knows how many sources, but that's the one thing that's a consistent. So that's the one thing that seems to be the most effective to reach as many, but use every tool that's available and as possible. Altaloma has a new superintendent who has started just 1st of February, and she is taken to doing a weekly newsletter. And she has really enlisted the help of every principal in the district to provide updates to her, which in turn turned into that newsletter, and provide specific, a couple of notes, just a couple of quick items that are happening at every school. And this is going to continue. This is going to go on well into what we hope will be a normal world again. But it's, oh my gosh, what a great way for the rest of the district to see what's happening elsewhere. So yeah, again, it's the same themes, and come back to as many tools as you can possibly use.
And Troy, just a quick follow-up, anything from the state? I know that your previous response covered quite a bit of material.
Yeah, I think Jesus and Sid said most of it. We've been doing more social media, more of everything, but definitely more social media, more video, anything that has impact. We've done more text alerts, trying to get our members to contact their legislators about certain legislation. I think people are more engaged now, and so some people will still have fatigue of getting too much information, but I think they're a little bit more receptive right now because they're still in crisis mode and really focused on what they're doing.
And Troy, you have a co-presenter running back and forth.
I've got
and
a couple.
Part of our Zoom meeting.
The short one, I don't think you can really see, but my oldest daughter, Ophelia, you can see a little bit more.
Well, that's great. And that's part of our Zoom world now, the interruptions and being family at home. And so that's okay. All right, we have one more question, then we'll do kind of some closing comments. We already talked a little bit about the school board in Northern California, where the members had an open mic. They were made comments disparaging of parents, and they ended up after a couple of days and 8,500 signatures, the whole board resigned. A letter went out to the community with a statement from the former members saying that they deeply regret their comments and that the story made national news. So let's really looking at the power of social media and that everything is on the record. With that in mind, how does one build trust during and after a crisis situation? So let's start with Sid. Crisis communications, 1A.
Well, it starts with the simple process of your actions are going to speak louder than your words. And if you can walk the walk, communications, good communications isn't going to put lipstick on a pig. You have to be able to be true to who you are. And this situation, they blew it. And they know it. They had to fall on the sword, and they had to apologize. And in a world of social media, it's out there. And right now, so many people, the world is so sensitive to everything we do. And we have to be more sensitive to how we behave. Everything we do as a public figure, as a board member, is going to build trust leading up to that situation. And so that building that relationship with the news media, with the public, with the community, with all your constituents is critical in good times, because when bad times come, it will be reflected. And if you have that, this type of a relationship going in, you can bet it's going to be that much worse when that stuff is on the fan over there. So, I will keep coming back to any crisis situation, those same themes that I mentioned earlier, of transparency and consistency, being honest out there, being continually telling your message, and timely, being available. And one of the things, and I'll say it quickly and get done. It's a crisis situation that's not like this, and it wasn't really a social media thing, but it's an example of how the message was somewhat controlled. And we go back 5 years ago to the terrorist attacks in San Bernardino. And if you recall, then the chief of police was holding press briefings almost hourly. He was, almost a ridiculous frequency with the updates that he was giving, but it was effective and it was good. And that guy came off as a rock star because he was able to communicate the latest developments and what was happening, and the casualties, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All the information as it became available. He wasn't waiting, we'll wait till 5 o'clock when it's a convenient time. It was constant, and he was the right guy to be out front because he came off as tough and we're handling this issue. And this is what has to be part of your plan. The thing is, a crisis situation, whether it's school board members saying the inappropriate things or it's a terrorist attack, you have to plan for it because it's inevitable. It's not if something's going to happen, it's when it's going to happen. And so it's developing a communications plan is step one. And that is not something that just sits on the shelf. It's something that you have to learn. And so when it happens, you're not going to have time to take it down. You're going to have to say, I know it. But it's been written down. So you've learned it, you know it. You didn't just study, you wrote it. And so it helps you to move beyond because you kind of walked through it. You've walked through the steps. So you're doing your own rehearsal, if you will, to plan for whatever that crisis situation.
Well, let me leave it at that with crisis communications, really timely and accurate. I think we covered that in the slides earlier. We're almost done here with the time that we have. So I'm going to ask just a quick one takeaway from each person about tonight's communications, effective communications workshop. And then I have just a couple of quick announcements at the very end. So Jesus, let's start with you. One takeaway from tonight.
We need to deliver the messages accurately. We need to deliver the one voice message you mentioned. And the message is to tell the people that we are here to continue serving the students, even during and after the crisis. And we're going to be transparent as we deliver the message. We're going to tell you exactly what we're going to do. But before we decide that, we're going to listen to you. It is important to listen what the community needs, where the needs are, fulfill those needs, and continue serving the students the best possible way, because that's why we are here, because we want the students to be successful. So we want to be transparent, clear, concise, one voice, and meet the needs and move forward in the best possible way.
Thank you, Jesus. Karen, one quick takeaway.
So we talked a little bit about, trust is built up front, and we talked about the process, we talked about the bylaws. So as a board, talk about with your governance team what you're going to do before a crisis hits, because then you know what the process is. Reflect on being a good leader, coming at this earnestly, and then you won't make comments like the board up front if you have empathy in your heart and quality, and you've developed your skills and you know your plan.
Very good. Troy, one quick takeaway.
Yeah, I think Karen stole my thunder there, but I just want to emphasize that crisis communication begins before you have a crisis. And the boards that are going to be most effective are the boards that have been intentional about communication and about listening and incorporating the feedback. Because if you start from a trust deficit and then something bad happens, the natural assumption is going to be you were at fault. So you just have to build that credibility. And now is a time for school districts to start banking that. If you're a school district that is already back in school, providing regular updates about how it's going, making sure there's an understanding about your plan, either putting out surveys or having town halls or some other means of information where you can get feedback. How is this working for people? I hear from a lot of parents in different districts, just as friends, not even in my role with CSBA. Well, you have to pick up your kid in the middle of the day and it's 2 days a week and it's almost worse than not going back. And did the board think about this? Maybe they did and they decided this is the best way we could do it and still be safe and to get an agreement with our unions to come back. To talk about what the extenuating circumstances were that forced you to do it in this unusual way that some people may be happy with. And when you do have a COVID case, and there will be some, immediate communication, if you can determine through tracing whether the transmission was at the school or elsewhere, what assess the level of threat, kind of preview for your public, your stakeholders, what the steps are you're going to be taking, why you are taking them, and then provide regular updates. That will give you more credibility, more capital with your stakeholders going forward.
Okay. Sid, 30-second takeaway.
Oh, well, my takeaway is that I've spent the whole night giving my thoughts and my opinions, and I appreciate everything that Jesus and Karen and Troy have contributed, and you too, of course, Dennis, and everything you guys have said has been right on point, and I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, very good. I'm going to go to share my share screen just here real quick, if it'll come up. And we would like you to do an evaluation for the of our meeting tonight. Let me get to, is it coming up? There it is. Here it comes. So we have a link and it is case sensitive. So it's on the screen. It's bit.ly/boardsmanship communication survey. And boardsmanship communication survey is all one word, but with a capital B, capital C, and capital S. So it's a real quick, it'll just take you a minute or two, but we would really appreciate the feedback. We're trying some new things with this webinar. We are very encouraged with the number of participants that we've had and a number of participants that have stayed through the whole thing. One other quick announcement for those in San Bernardino County. We do have our Spring Awards program honoring the San Bernardino County Education Medal of Honor and Distinguished Service Award program. We have a lot of outstanding entries. We were really quite pleased with the number that we ended up with. We didn't know how this would work, but it will be a virtual meeting. We'll be getting more information out about this later on, but just wanted to bring that to your attention. Save the date, Monday, April 26th. So with that, I want to thank you for joining us this evening for this Effective Communications for Successful Governance team. I hope you learned a lot, and I hope the information was of value. Again, we want to thank you for participating, attending this, and with that, we'll say goodnight.